Hello, all, and welcome to the Silicon Valley AAUW branch program on higher ed at risk and what you can do about it. My name is Vicki Reeder. I'm a 50-year member of AAUW Silicon Valley. Megan Kissel is AAUW's Senior Director of Policy and Member Advocacy. She leads AAUW's mission-driven policy work at the federal level and supports the grassroots advocacy work of AAUW's membership network. Megan has a long history with AAUW, having previously worked in the policy department before returning in 2023 to head up policy and member advocacy. In addition to her work at AUW National, Megan is also a member of her local branch in Alexandria, Virginia. Megan is particularly proud of her work to expand LGBTQ equality in the Deep South with the Human Rights Campaign. She is also proud of her work with the Conservation Lands Foundation, which resulted in the successful protection of more than 5 million acres of public land in California and the Western United States. Megan decided to pursue a master's degree in social work with a focus on community organizing from Howard University because she had previously spent 2 years in AmeriCorps working with middle school students who face social and educational challenges. This experience led her to want to look at how to create change on a larger level. Megan, I would hope you will now take the wheel of this webinar and tell us all. Thank you.
Absolutely. Vicki, thank you so much. And I'm going to share my screen for the slides. And okay. So thank you all. I have to say, first, I am so glad to be back at AUW, and I feel like I came back at the right time. Although I will admit that anytime somebody says, "Have you seen the news?" it does send a bit of a shiver of fear through my spine. But I appreciate everybody who's here tonight because honestly, we're not going to be able to fight back alone. So it takes all of us together. It takes all of us as members, as AUW around the country to be working on this holistically and with one voice. I mean, over the last year, we've watched this administration pursue what AUW has called just a relentless campaign to dismantle higher education, weakening civil rights protections or enforcement of those protections, slashing student aid, slashing research funding, going after international students, and really trying to hollow out the very agency that's supposed to be defending students' rights. And I know you've seen pieces of this, and we're going to talk much more about this. So what I want to do tonight is connect some of the dots and show you where AUW has stepped in and where branches and members like you have been absolutely essential. Also, just to set the stage, I'm planning to talk for about 30 or so minutes. Please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A. I'm also going to try to weave in answers to some of the pre-submitted questions, but also we'll definitely have time at the end to discuss. So the first thing that I want to mention is why AUW right now in this fight. So I can give you the whole history of AUW as being around since 1881. Started by women who were doing something radical at the time, which was going to college. So since our beginning, we've been pushing to make higher education more open, more accessible, more inclusive. And we do that in a number of different ways. I'm being joined by a cat. Our main way is fellowships and grants for scholars and community projects in the US and around the country and around the world. If you're not aware, we're the largest non-institutional funder of women's graduate education in the country, and that doesn't even take into account the generosity and scholarships from our states and branches. So for more than 140 years, our fellowships, grants, our scholarships have helped thousands of women, including many women of color and international students, earn advanced degrees that otherwise they couldn't afford. So our strategic plan that was launched earlier this year really prioritizes what we are good at, which is funding higher education. It's not enough to fund higher education unless we're also dedicated to removing the barriers to success, both in education and in the workforce. And our strategic plan also focuses on making sure that we can all be stronger together as we move forward. So really strengthening our reach. So the piece that I will talk about is like my team, the policy and member advocacy team that works with members like yourself to shape policy and defend civil rights protections. So that when an administration slashes aid, tries to eliminate Graduate Plus loans, this isn't abstract for us. It's about our fellows. It's about our grantees, our members' kids and grandkids. It's the women that we've invested in and the next generation that we're trying to reach. So I won't go too much into this, but higher education is still incredibly important. Nothing annoys me more than opening up my email and reading the articles about does higher education still have a value? What's the purpose of it? Why are we spending so much money on this? The reality is, higher education is even more important for women, especially women of color. Having a higher education degree is associated with higher earnings, more job stability. We're going to be putting out a report later next month that looks at the pay gap, but also really how higher education is almost a necessity for women in order to not really close the gap, but increase their own financial stability, and with that, have a better chance at gender equity. But we also know that women of color are more likely to borrow for college and graduate school. We still do see segmentation in terms of fields of study, as well as occupational segregation, just women going into different degrees. So when higher education is under attack, when civil rights protections are rolled back, when aid is slashed, women's economic security is under attack. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of specific things that I want to talk about tonight. Got attacks on higher education. Quite frankly, when I sat down to think about this, I really had to think about how long we had to talk, because we could probably talk for days. So I'm going to lump this into a couple of different buckets. Talking about the Department of Education itself, specifically attacks on international students, because we saw some of that coming out first this year, where we're seeing efforts to undermine civil rights, we're seeing just structural changes to making the cost and affordability much more difficult in terms of achieving higher education. And then I don't want to leave this conversation without talking about what we can do, what we have been doing, and what we will continue to do in ways that you can be involved in defending higher education. So it doesn't make sense to leap into having this conversation without just at least a measure of understanding of what the U.S. Department of Education is for, because there's a lot of myth and a lot of misinformation that you hear on the news. The Department of Education does not teach students. The U.S. Department of Education does not choose curricula. When the Department of Education was founded, when it was created to do three very specific things: enforce civil rights laws in education. And that's protections on racial discrimination, sex discrimination, disability, and age. Administering student aid, there was an understanding that the federal government had a role in supporting students wanting to achieve higher education. And that includes both on the front end of while one is in college, in terms of Pell Grants and other ways to lessen the cost altogether beforehand, as well as loan programs and student loan debt forgiveness programs, such as public service loan forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness. The third thing that the Department of Education was really created to do is to promote equal educational opportunity. Regardless of where you are, regardless of what you look like, where you live, how much money your family earns, how can we bolster a strong public education and higher education? So the Department of Ed was created to center students' rights and educational equality, not to scatter its core purpose across agencies whose missions are labor, public lands, foreign policy. So when the Department of Ed is strong and fully staffed, students, families, and advocates have somewhere to turn when something goes wrong. If that's discrimination, mishandled sexual assault complaints, or broken financial aid systems. This year, we've really seen a tremendous effort to undermine that. We've seen massive cuts, staffing cuts at the Department of Education, including a disproportional amount of cuts at the Office of Civil Rights. At the beginning of this year, there were 12 regional offices of civil rights with the Department of Education. 7 of those were shuttered much earlier this year. The result of that was the fact that students and schools that were filing civil rights claims with the Department of Ed, cases were being dismissed. The length of time for an investigation is much, much longer. And that was before we saw a second round of reductions in force, which is really just a nice way of saying a lot of people are being separated from their job, a very important job that's supposed to be supporting students. The government shutdown that we just got out of was layered on top of a court decision that just cleared the way for the Department of Ed to fire even more of the civil rights staff. So the shutdown was definitely a 1-2 punch to students. What we just saw 2 weeks ago, the Department of Ed announcing, this wasn't even 2 weeks ago. Sorry, I'm thinking in dog years. What we just saw last week was a set of partnerships that the Department of Education has created with other government agencies. And this is to shift day-to-day work of major education programs to other federal agencies. That includes the Department of Labor, that includes Health and Human Services, it includes Homeland Security, and the Department of Interior. So we have grave concerns about this. And, students are really being left in limbo with this transition. We've written a lot about this, and I can point you to that a little bit later, but this isn't about reform. It's just about taking our foot off the gas of supporting students, just as attacks on students' rights are multiplying. We also, as I was thinking about this, I was really trying to remind myself what was going on at the beginning of this year. The beginning of this year also saw a slew of executive orders. One I'm going to reference because I'm sure it's right on the top of everybody's mind is the Restoring Equality of Opportunity and Meritocracy. I'm bringing this one up because there's about to be a lot about this. This executive order has set off a series of dominoes that we're about to see start falling. This executive order directed agencies to weaken Title VI protections and eliminate standards that rely on the legal premise of disparate impact. That's actually one of the key tools that we have for identifying systematic discrimination. When you strip out disparate impact protections, you make it a lot harder to challenge policies that look neutral on paper, but when you look at the data, when you look at the evidence, disproportionately harm people of color, women, students with disabilities, or English learners. So together, a lot of these moves are undercutting Department of Ed's ability to enforce civil rights laws. They're making it easier for schools to ignore serious complaints. And they're really signaling to students that the federal government is no longer on their side. The other piece that we did see at the Department of Administration was bringing on leadership that doesn't believe in the mission. AUW opposed Linda McMahon's nomination and confirmation to be the Secretary of Education. And her first letter to the staff at the Department of Ed was about the final mission. So this is not somebody who supports public education. She supports voucher schemes that actually drain funds from public schools. She's shown a disregard for the work of the Office of Civil Rights and the safety of student survivors. So when leadership doesn't believe in the mission, they treat students as optional and borrower support as expendable. This matters to AUW and our fellows. So with that foundation, we've got an education department that is being hollowed out. So let me talk a couple about some of the targets that we've seen of the attacks on higher ed. So we've all seen a slew of the headlines. One of the things that we really saw at the beginning of this year was international students. Now, international students are not an add-on to our higher education system. They're actually central to it. They bring global perspectives into classrooms, labs, and clinics. They're helping sustain graduate and STEM programs that otherwise would have shrunk or had to close. They contribute billions of dollars to local and national economies. And for nearly all international students, they have to pay full ride. So this is a very important part of the business of higher education, is having international students. And I want to remind everyone, it's deeply personal for AUW because we've been providing international fellowships since 1917 and have brought thousands of women from more than 150 countries to study in the US, to contribute to research and become leaders in education, science, and public policy. A couple of things that we've seen this year. In June, AUW condemned a federal order that was at work to restrict international student visas, specifically at Harvard University. This wasn't a one-off, but it was part of a disturbing pattern of motivated attacks. This was coming on top of abrupt cancellation of research grants, threats to the colleges and universities' nonprofit status and accreditation. What we were also seeing with the attacks on international students, a lot of it was wrapped in the rhetoric around terrorism. So we've seen a lot of attacks and making it very difficult for international students to learn in the United States using national security language. So we're normalizing and othering international students. This type of security language can fuel overly broad screenings. We're seeing that play out in a lot of different areas and really biasing decisions. We know, in theory, we know this is chilling legitimate applications for women who are already facing high hurdles, but quite frankly, we know it directly. This past year, with our international fellowship programs, we saw 13 women being impacted. They couldn't get their visas. Their visa application interviews were paused. 2 women declined their fellowships because they just didn't feel comfortable studying in this country. So that's our international students. Looking a little bit more domestically, let me talk about civil rights. We've talked about the infrastructure, the Department of Education, and international students. So what about some of these attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion and Title IX? There's also a number of critical court cases where AUW is weighing in. We started this administration with a 100-day relentless assault on higher education, and civil rights protections were a prime target. I mentioned there's been efforts to pull back disparate impact protections under Title VI. That's going to make it harder to challenge policies that disproportionately impact students of color. I'll give you all a bit of a heads up. Keep an eye for next week with the Department of Energy. I know I've been talking about the Department of Education, but keep your eyes peeled on the Department of Energy. This past spring, the Department of Energy decided to go for a set of sneak attacks on Title IX and Title VI. I've got to say, we had 800 AUW members stand up, send in letters. We've contributed quite a number of letters to that comment period. The initial issuance of the final rule had been postponed twice. One of the Title IX rules proposed by the Department of Energy was fully withdrawn. And yet, we're anticipating, unless there is another postponement, we will see a disparate impact rollback and a Title IX rollback from the Department of Energy on December 9th. So make sure that you're getting our action alert emails. Hopefully you're all getting way too many emails from me, because we will definitely let you know when that happens and what the impact of that's going to be. We're also seeing this administration really make moves to weaponize Title IX. Title IX has not gone away. The foundation of the law is still there. But quite frankly, Title IX has been a promise to students that we're always trying to keep. Sometimes we keep it better than others. Currently, this administration and Secretary McMahon are actually using Title IX to do the exact opposite of fostering inclusive environments. They're actually using it to target some students, and target especially transgender students. We should never look at a set of policies that are going to make school and life harder for people who are the most vulnerable. We're also seeing these incredibly vague attacks on DEI. And we've decided that these three letters, oh my gosh, you can't possibly use them in combination because they're vague, they're fuzzy, people don't know what they are. But quite frankly, keep saying them, and that's what we're doing. This year, we are not backing down from this. We are not backing down from saying that we believe that education environments are better when they are diverse. They're better when they're inclusive, that we want an equitable learning environment for all students, regardless of where they live, what they look like, what religion they are, what sex they are, and so on. So we've had a lot of very fuzzy, vague language, but we're starting to see the signals from Washington, D.C. being transmitted down to the states. We were already seeing attacks on higher education at the state level across the country. Now we're starting to see really awkward efforts to say, nope, you can't talk about diversity. Just was reading something today. I believe it was from Texas, or I shouldn't be throwing them under the bus, but about how one university is getting rid of all classes that talk about race and gender because they don't want to be accused of running afoul of promoting ideology or promoting an advocacy opinion rather than actually studying this issue. So this is really having a very challenging effect. The laws haven't gone away, but the enforcement of them, there's significant efforts to tear down the pillars of educational access and accountability. So I want to be mindful of time. There's so much, and there's so much more that I'd like to get to, but let me hit on something that took up a lot of my time this year, and that is the budget reconciliation law that passed on July 3rd. You may have heard of this, referred to as the One Big Beautiful Bill. This darn thing was just one big broken promise to students. And I hate to say this, it's not as bad as it could have been. And that's thanks to you, and that's thanks to all of you who raised your voice. This was actually a bill that, at the beginning, was looking to really slash Pell Grants. It was looking to eliminate work study jobs. I had the coolest work study job. I worked at a costume shop for my 4 years, where it would have made it so much harder for undergraduates. There were even proposals to eliminate subsidized student loans for undergraduates. So that would have meant that a student would have, first day of college, you sign your promissory note. And, if you graduate in 4 years, students would have been handed a diploma in one hand and an interest bill in the other. Fortunately, some of a bad bill was made a lot less bad because AUW members and folks around the country stood up, made phone calls, sent in letters. We had about 250 members actually join us for training on doing in-district legislative visits with members of Congress and then set up meetings. That's the kind of action that we want to continue to support and support all of you in doing. So the one big beautiful bill, the budget reconciliation law now, instead of expanding access, the version of it that passed, it erects new barriers. It's going to shut millions of students, especially women and low-income families, communities of color, out of education. So on the loan side, a couple of things are happening that just made a lot of news recently, and I want you to hold on to this because it's going to be important in a couple of weeks. The law that was passed eliminates Grad Plus loans for new borrowers. So anybody who's currently got one is all set, but anybody thinking about going to grad school will no longer be able to get a Grad Plus loan. And there's going to be caps on Parent Plus loans, which are actually even more important for families of color. The other thing, a couple of the other things that budget reconciliation is doing on the K-12 side was actually creating a private voucher scheme, but creating public school vouchers in a way that breaks the connection between the government funding and the civil rights laws. If we were to have a voucher program where the federal government directly sent money to a private school, what comes with federal money are strings. Those strings attached are civil rights protections. However, the voucher scheme that was included in budget reconciliation has more of a third-party element to it. So the money does not go directly to private schools, which means the civil rights protections don't follow the money. One of many reasons that we oppose this. But looking back at higher education, we're also seeing loan caps for graduate education. This is the part that maybe it was probably just my Thanksgiving table that we were discussing the fact that there's a lot of news about what was considered a professional degree, what was considered a graduate degree. I have to say, I think Congress probably should have done some message testing about this before they decided to do a loan cap on what was considered graduate versus professional degrees. It's not actually intended to say certain things are not professions, but it's meant to say some majors will have a graduate loan cap ceiling of $100,000, and some graduate majors will have a loan cap of $200,000. You may have heard that nursing is in the considered graduate, and we'll have I hope I didn't flip those, we'll have the lower cap. And that's really enraged people when they saw what was coming out of negotiations following the passage of this bill. I want you all to be fired up about this. And I want you to know that after the budget reconciliation bill was passed, they created negotiated rulemaking sessions. This is super wonky. It was never part of anybody's civics class, but folks have got into rooms together for 2 full weeks, sat down, hammered out certain portions regarding higher education funding, and came out with some recommendations. Those recommendations will be posted for public comment probably in January. And we're going to need you. We're going to need everybody on this call and everybody that you know to be making the case against what is coming out of this. So the full rules, the full proposal rules have not been made public yet. We've gotten a sneak peek at some of them, and we have a lot of concerns. They're the same concerns about this is going to just keep people, and women especially, out of advanced degrees at a time where there's so much degree inflation. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. You almost have to have a master's to get a job around here. This is going to make things much more difficult. We have a lot of places where you can't be a teacher without a graduate degree. And now we're going to make it a lot harder to pay for those graduate degrees. So, little heads up, I mentioned a bit earlier, we're going to see probably next week an attack on civil rights protections coming out of the Department of Energy. And probably in January, we're going to need your help responding to proposed rules that are coming out of the budget reconciliation law. There will actually be another set of negotiated rulemaking sessions that will start next week, that they'll be looking at repayment options, and they'll be looking at revising repayment options. We'll probably see that later in the spring. All of those, the loan caps that we're hearing about, all of these are set to go into effect of July of 2026. This is a very fast turnaround. What I will do after the fact is we have seen news leaks about what these professions include. I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of that, and that can be shared as part of the follow-up to this presentation. And definitely make sure that you're on our email list so that we can let you know when things start moving about that. So, I mean, honestly, when we're talking about affordability, these aren't just lines on a spreadsheet. We're talking about whose dreams we get to finance and whose we quietly just push aside. I'm saying this as somebody who had the benefit of receiving Pell Grants, had work study. I think the same year that I came back to AUW was the same year I finally paid off all of my student loans from undergrad and graduate degrees. So I get this. This is something that we can all identify with. And on top of that, dare I say, we still have budget issues. I know that we just finished a shutdown, and people might think, hey, we're in a good place. Nah, we're not. The big appropriations bill that actually includes funding for the Department of Education for FY26, which actually started on October 1st. And yes, it's December. We're going to get the House and Senate are going to go back to having a rather large fight about this. The deadline for the continuing resolution on the budget is January 30th, and the House budget and the Senate budget, when it comes to education, are very far apart. They're very far apart on they're rather united on Pell Grants, but they're keeping Pell Grants flat. So that's not keeping up with the rising cost of tuition and housing and food cost. But we're seeing very big differences in terms of campus childcare programs. And will we or will we not support those? So when we're talking about the education budget, the budgets are a reflection of values. And do we value education? And do we value students? So we're also seeing what's now what's been called a short-term or workforce Pell as something that was included in the budget reconciliation law. And we're concerned that that has been put into place without some gender equity guardrails and making sure that folks who've historically been excluded from longer-term higher education are not pushed into some predatory areas or not preyed upon by for-profit institutions. So I want to give you all of you an opportunity for questions. So, but before I do that, let me just share a couple of things. What are we doing about it? And what can you do about it? Because we can do a lot together. As I said, we've seen some good steps. We made a bad bill less bad. We've seen a proposed rule from the Department of Energy be withdrawn. Some of this might feel a little bit on the edges, but we are making progress, and it's really important that our champions in the House and Senate understand that as constituents, we want them to stand up for higher education. So I'm going to share a set of links with you, but if you ever want to know anything that is going on at AUW National and when it comes to policy, first, please feel free to give me a shout anytime. My email address is pretty simple. It's my last name, first initial @AUW. But quite frankly, we have an advocacy at AUW mailbox, and we really do read it. So all of you now know that every time you get an email with my name on it saying, hey, we need you to take action, you now know that there is a real person behind those emails. And I'm here to answer any questions. And we want to be as transparent as possible about what we're doing. What we're doing as AUW and what we're doing along with our coalition partners so that we can make our voices louder. We have a page of policy updates on our website. It's a little bit ridiculous. The picture on the screen is a little bit dated because we are constantly sending letters directly from AAUW or in coalition with other organizations and partnership with other coalitions to make sure that we're raising our voice on higher education and economic security and civil rights. You'll also find on the policy updates page, you'll find that we are weighing in as an on friend of the court briefs for some court cases in New York State. There's a court case that will be heard in front of the U.S. Supreme Court on January 3rd about transgender students that AUW is supportive of. So we will be out and we will be at the court and we will be standing in solidarity with students. So we want to make sure you can see everything that we are doing. We have a take action page that always has different actions that you can take at the federal level. You have a great team in California for California state work, so I would defer to them on any state questions. The other thing that I wanted to give you a heads up on, we're going to continue calling out attacks on higher ed, on civil rights. We're going to name the things that are politically motivated, and we're going to make sure that people understand what the real life consequences are of some of these actions. Is the Department of Education in its current iteration perfect? Not necessarily, but does it have a role? It certainly does. It has a role for civil rights enforcement, for borrower support. We have a group of members on the East Coast, in the DC area. We refer to them as Lobby Corps, and Lobby Corps has met probably two dozen times this year with lawmakers from states around the country. They're representing many of you, of going up, talking to your lawmakers, mostly their staff, but they're putting a face on our name collectively. So you have an open invitation. If you happen to be in the DC area on a Thursday, let us know. If we're going up lobbying, we would love to have you join us. We also want to make sure that even if you can't, we're providing you trainings and webinars so that you can level up your personal advocacy. And we've got a couple of things coming up. We had a really interesting panel conversation about working in coalition. We have a resource about equity principles that you can bring to your branch and your own work when you're trying to work with others. Some of our upcoming policy events in January, we're having a training we're bringing in guest speakers from the Alliance for Justice. And I have to say, they are the folks that I go to when I want to have a conversation of, hey, are we in the lines of what's political but nonpartisan? And they have their tagline is bolder advocacy. Let's be bold. Let's be bold together. There's a lot of things. AUW is nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean we don't have a voice. We are political. We have been political for many years. And if you want to make sure that you're staying on the right side of those lines, please join us on January 29th for that. We're actually going to have AUW California. Your former state public policy chair will be leading a conversation about school board advocacy, really kind of showing off the California School Board project, but as well as hearing from the ACLU about where we are seeing attacks on education at the school board level and hearing from branches in other states as well. We're also going to be bringing together some of our alumni and fellows to have a conversation on January 15th about the future of higher education, what we are seeing politically, and what that means from folks who are sitting inside academia. So I definitely invite you this is a first step. I hope this is a first conversation. By the way, total shout out to Paula, who also ran her university's costume shop, because definitely the best place to be in a college campus. I would love to exchange funny stories. So let me pause. Well, not quite yet. One more thing. I know we are in fundraising season, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to please, in addition to your membership dues, do think about extending your generosity to AUW, because our membership dues don't actually cover any of our policy work. So if you find this interesting, if you think it's important, if you want us to be doing more, we need your support. So I'll throw that out there, since we're definitely in the giving season. So let me pause and I'm gonna put a screen up that actually has our email address on this. So any questions that I haven't gotten to, I want to make sure that you have a way to get hold of us. There are real people on the team. There's 3 people on the policy team at the national office. We do check this email box on a very regular basis, maybe not the same day, but very closely. So let me pause and take a look at some of the questions. So what's AUW doing for international students? I have the same answer for several things, and it's not going to be a satisfying answer. It may not be a satisfying answer for you. We are raising our voice. We're making sure people know what is happening, because that's one of the first things that we need to do, is throw some sunlight on some of these actions that are not going to be the front page news. we're also, some of these actions are coming out in the form of regulatory action. Regulatory advocacy is just not as sexy as trying to get engaged with the state legislatures or Congress. But I've got to say, our members are totally stepping up. I mentioned back in the spring when we saw rules from the Department of Energy that would impact Title IX. We had about 800 folks stand up and join us in individual letters, because volume here counts a lot with the regulations. The end of August, beginning of September, we had more than 2,000 members saying, I'm standing with you, I'm standing with students, and fighting back about this. We are seeing some regulatory moves around international students, so we are pushing back on that. We are also reaching out to the Women's Caucus in Congress and other members of both the House and Senate Education Committees, the Senate Help Committee, the House Ed and Workforce Committee. There are several things that we anticipate are upcoming. That one of our best courses of action is to remind Congress that they are an independent, that they are a co-equal branch of government. And they are showing signs of life around that. At the beginning of the year, not so much. Just seemed to do anything the administration wanted, forgot that it was a co-equal branch. We are seeing some changes with that. So when you see those emails saying, hey, we need your help writing to members of Congress, even the members of Congress, if you are in an area where your member agrees with us, we still need to make sure that these folks stay champions with us. Somebody was asking, how do we repeal some of these laws? Okay, first step is we need to make sure that people are educated before they vote, that people understand what their rights are about voting, what they are voting on, what the lawmakers who are running for office, or what the people running for various offices, what they stand for. And that's something that AUW has done very well, and done very well in community. With our It's My Vote campaign, at the national level, we do a congressional voting record. We'll be releasing that in early September next year so that can be shared. We're also working with branches. This is why we want to talk about how to stay nonpartisan, especially in an election year, because there's a lot we can do. So we need people to be out there and voting, because the current makeup of the 119th Congress, the current makeup, they will not repeal these laws. They just passed them. So the first thing we need is we need a different set of people at the table. So when we don't like the decisions that come out of Congress, we need to change the players. Same thing at the state level. So that's not being partisan, that's just being realistic. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that folks who are voted in are people who agree with our values. That can be a Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter. But so we need to change the players in order for us to change the laws. So another question that we get quite often, I mentioned that we work in coalition. Some of our partners, some of our coalitions, many of them are much more informal coalitions, and they're different groups for different issues. Some groups, we are in a coalition that focuses on pregnant and parenting students. Some of the groups that we see there are a pregnant scholar. I'm trying to think of who else. National Women's Law Center. We're in coalition with organizations around Title IX and specific aspects of Title IX. There are groups such as End Rape on Campus, Know Your Nine. On some of the student debt and the cost of higher education, we work with organizations like Ed Trust, TICAS, Protect Borrowers, students at places that both center students and organizations that have a much more robust research shop on some of the policy issues. So we trade information. We share information back about what we're hearing from members of Congress, what we're hearing about the regulatory process, coordinating messaging and actions. And we do have a list of the issues and where we are in coalition, and I can share that with your state public policy chair to share around. We don't have one comprehensive list because if there is an issue like reproductive rights and there's something coming up, we get engaged with a set of partners. We try to work with folks who may have more expertise in an area. And I saw that there was a question about, sharing the information. Absolutely. It's just anything that you get from National. When we have a call to action, please share it. Please let people know. Our actions are not only for members, but let our members be the mouthpiece. We want you to be well informed so that you are empowered to share information in your community and you feel that you want to get engaged. And I am just going to. There was a question about. There's two questions that I just want to acknowledge. One is specifically, are we working with American Nurses Association and AACN, another nursing organization? We're not currently working directly with those. I will say, if you have contacts there, please let me know, because since we anticipate proposed rules that we'll need to respond to, the fact that they're targeting particular professions, particular degrees, it's not the professions themselves, it's the degrees that they're saying are not professional degrees. I have an MSW, that is one of the degrees that would have, should these rules go into effect, that would be one of the degrees that would have a lower loan cap. There is a tremendous opportunity for us to be working with organizations that represent some of those groups. So if you have relationships with them, please let me know. We definitely want to have as robust of a response as possible. There's also been a comment, there's a question about specifically Northwestern, but I just want to acknowledge something that I didn't go into, that I didn't discuss, but we're seeing colleges and universities being extorted by this administration. That it's not just Northwestern, it's Brown University, it's Harvard, it's Columbia, it's Penn State, it's all over the place, and California is not exempt from these attacks. And a lot of it's such a bait and switch. My comment on this is really watch what they're doing and not necessarily what they're saying. There's a lot of discussion around some of these universities that on paper, it was about anti-Semitism. And I think we all agree that anti-Semitism needs to be addressed and should never be normalized. But what we're seeing is a total inappropriate withholding of grant funding, of research funding for colleges and universities. That doesn't help anybody. That is not going to resolve anti-Semitism. And then the actions that some of these colleges and universities have to take in order to get their money back, what they're settling on. We're seeing a lot of anti-transgender rhetoric here. So they're saying it's about one thing, but they're going after the schools on another. So it is incredibly important don't just read the headlines, see what actions they're threatening the schools and making schools take. There was a compact for academic excellence that the Department of Education invited 9 schools to sign earlier this fall. And The schools all politely declined. Then the Department of Ed extended that invitation to all schools. And we've got the new school in Florida standing up and saying, yes, yes, we'll sign this compact. But it's a throwing away your academic freedom. It's an agreement to freeze your tuition for 5 years. That does sound good for students, but it's really terrible for colleges. It's talking about limits for how many international students from each country you can have. So it's a terrible thing for schools, for students. So we're seeing multiple ways that this administration is finding all sorts of levers to inappropriately step into higher education, how it functions, what is being taught, how it is funded. And some people may have heard me say, I've had a failure of imagination, but maybe that's a good thing. I've lived in the DC area for a fairly long time, and it means that I'm not jaded, because I do wake up some days and say, wow, did not see that coming. The Compact for Higher Education was one of those. So there's many things, but all of this, I want to thank you for all of this, because thank you for giving me an opportunity to be with you this afternoon to talk about this. This is my favorite topic to talk about, whether it's when I'm at work or at Thanksgiving dinner. So, I'm here for you. And thank you all for being such tremendous advocates on the West Coast. And Vicki, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you very much. This is fascinating and infuriating, I must say. Thank you to everyone who attended. I'm sure, as Megan has made it clear, that she wants to hear from you and she wants your engagement and action. And if any of you have questions when we conclude, you know now where to send them. And then this program has been recorded, and the video will be available if any of you want to use it. Thank you all. It was a great, let's see, we had 90 people here at one moment. And as the hour is concluded, we have a few who are doing other things now. But Megan, again, thank you very, very much. We wish you the best. I so enjoyed my time on the National AEW board back in the 90s, and I'm glad to know people like you are there. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, and goodbye, and we'll see you next time.